Welcome to Speaking of Men. You're watching public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Joining us in the studio today is Gary Lucas. Gary is professionally a private investigator, but Gary fought his battle for child custody through the courts as under the term they call pro se. One of the major focuses of men in America these days is equal access to the child and the ability to play a real loving, caring role in the child's life other than just 4 Saturdays a month or whatever the courts deign as being proper. So what we're going to talk about today is pro se dads and custody, and if you are a male, fighting for custody. Gary, why don't you just briefly describe what you do in your line of work, how it helped you in the pro se approach, and a little bit of how you became to be involved in the battle, etc. Just give us a background, if you would.
Well, what would help me by being a private investigator is that I'm exposed to the jargon, I'm exposed to the personalities, I know where the courthouse is. When I tried to decide what would help me, or what I could say would have been influential regarding being a private investigator, it seemed that being a private investigator was not as important as other things. However, I think that because I'm able to have some of the language, because I've worked on literally hundreds of domestic relations cases, you would think that it would give me some sort of ability to present my case. However, I found out that it didn't. I found out that I was under an extreme disadvantage from the very beginning. What I found out was more important was my history of being in a domestic relations conflict for 35 years, beginning with my family, my mother and father's divorce, my first divorce, and then down to this one. That gave me a much greater resource in that I had seen a continuum of 3 decades of what occurs to men in divorce. The consequential effects of that was that you learn that bonding is perishable, that once it dies, in my experience, you can't rekindle it. Those sort of things seem to be more helpful than being a private investigator. I think a private investigator gets you over the fear of attorneys. Everybody's afraid of attorneys. I'm afraid of attorneys. They're very professional, knowledgeable, hardworking people, and they'll run over you in a second. And I have been run over, bulldozed, every way there is. What I was able to do is, being a private investigator, I was able to keep my wit about me enough to be able to use what they did to me as a learning experience, reframe it, and teach me to practice domestic relations according to what they were doing. Mm-hmm. So the private investigative part of it probably is not as important as just being in the domestic relations battle for.
Sure. What prompted you to seek custody of your son? And
well, I was a primary caregiver during the relationship. I'm kind of an older father, and I had waited for this child for a long time. Lost a child completely 25 years ago to divorce, wanting to have another child. So I was committed mentally, spiritually, physically, and so was my mother's son, and we were ready to parent. But when the divorce happened, I had been giving primary care, and so I wanted to continue. It was that simple. Achieving a little bit of maturity due to my years, I was not seeking to actualize myself with doing. I was beginning to become somewhat actualized, and as a result, I was more interested in directing the development of my son than I was in developing myself. So my attention being directed to him, I was definitely interested in continuing that relationship.
So losing one child, you decided you definitely weren't going to lose another. Well, what do you feel your greatest strengths were as a parent and are now, and why did you feel that you should have been the primary caregiver as compared to your wife?
You're asking many questions there.
Well,
You've asked 30 minutes worth of questions.
expound.
I think that you can have two primary caregivers.
Right.
I've always deferred to the mother's preference because I supported the mother's role. I've always supported women's rights. So I naturally did that. Circumstances created a situation where I started providing primary care to him. It wasn't a matter of me trying to edge the mother out. It's just a circumstances started it. So when the divorce came, that's what I was prepared to do. My greatest strength, I think, is that we discussed this in our men's group the other night. I think I went from, I experienced a transformation. I went from being an angry man to more or less becoming what I would describe as a human being. That transformation took 40 years. The loss of my father as a child was deterministic in my life. The unmet psychological and emotional needs that I found out later were driving me, compelling me to do things in my life that might not have had to do if had not lost my father. I found out that my daughter's loss of me, subsequent to or consequential to divorce, has created some self-esteem issues in my daughter's life, abandonment issues. She's now a very angry person. I feel certain that it was caused by me not being in her life. Therefore, knowing this was taking place, I still probably didn't have the psychological maturity to be doing what I'm doing. It seems that with the birth of my son, with 25 years of therapy, with concurrently receiving information that I hadn't had before regarding my condition and the condition of many men, I believe, I began to break through. In doing so, I did what is termed a transformation and was able to get in touch with my inner life. Subsequent to that, I was able to treat my child in an unconditional manner. I was able to respond to his dependency and emotional needs unconditionally. That in itself was a strength that made all the difference in the world. When you start to have the stress of divorce, of the legal domestic relations institution on your back, and financial failure due to the divorce, there is there is so much stress in one's life that if you don't have internal resources to be able to parent, you're not going to be able to parent. Fortunately for me, I started to get in touch with my inner self. So that's the strength that I would say was primary in this case.
Give me some of your major milestones.
Regarding the divorce?
Yeah.
Well, I think probably the first one was simply upon an unsubstantiated allegation, my ex-spouse was able to have me ordered from the home. I subsequently lost my office, lost my family, lost my life based upon an affidavit that was allegations that were untrue.
So you suffered personal and financial loss as a result of that?
Right, and most men do. Most men do not file first. Some do. Most women file first, and they have their case already worked out, and men are usually the ones that are ordered from the house. In doing so, they lose their home. No, the second milestone, or the most important milestone, was that after 2.5 years of fighting to preserve the father-child relationship, the court clinic, which is a group of psychologists in the 2nd Judicial District that evaluate domestic relations litigants, recommended that I be the primary custodian. So after 2.5 years of presenting myself to psychologists and lawyers, it was finally determined that what I was saying had validity, and at that time I was supported in my effort. That was last Christmas, and things have gone a lot better since.
You know, Jim Sims is a counselor that talks about anger a whole bunch, and he talks about the fact that any man going through a divorce and especially in a custody battle over his child, should be righteously angry. That's a real human emotion. And apparently that's used against men a great deal of the time. Do you have any reflections on that?
Definitely, and that's what was the impetus in my healing process. I was described as an angry man with the potential of harming the child and the mother. There wasn't any history to substantiate it, and there weren't any incidents that supported it. Nevertheless, because I'm a large, abrupt, white male, I fell into all the traps. And admittedly, I have been an angry man. If angry man would have fit on my license plate, I would have put it there. So I fell into that stereotype. I was also accused of sexual molestation and physical abuse, as well as stealing the child, accused of being a poor parent, accused of everything that I could be accused of. All were disproved and all were not true. But in the process, it took 2.5, 3 years to defend myself. The anger thing specifically. It was recommended that I seek anger therapy. Concurrent to that, I was in other therapeutic environments, and a lifetime of introspection, a lifetime of knowing that my anger was symptomatic of something. The birth of my child, all of this together seemed to create a situation where I was ready for something to happen to me. The information I learned that really helped me was that preceding every episode of anger, there's a state of shame. When I was shown how to trace my anger back to the state of shame, all of a sudden it dawned on me that I'd been in a state of shame all of my life. That led me to believe that once I viewed that and saw what I was shameful about, I realized that there really wasn't anything to be ashamed of. And at that time, my anger left me. It just fell away. It almost seems instantaneously. I'm sure it took several weeks to several months. But with that simple revelation or unfolding, my threshold of anger went to the lowest it had ever been in my life during the worst period of my life. That in itself allowed me to get in touch with myself, allowed me to be more accepting of myself. And the consequences of that was that I now was able to parent a child unconditionally. I could respond to a child without thinking that I had to do whatever was expected of society. I didn't have to discipline that child. I could let that child be a little child. I didn't have to teach that child anything. I could direct that child in a loving manner. It all resulted in an unconditional state of mind for me towards him. And I think that was a major accomplishment for me.
You were accused of child molestation,
Yeah.
battering,
Yeah.
kidnapping,
Yeah. Poor parenting skills.
poor parenting skills. I guess what interests me is there is child molestation out there.
Sure is, yeah.
There are men who batter,
Yeah.
and there are people, men who kidnap their children for whatever reasons. Do you think that that's a significant percentage? Or are you qualified to speak on that? I guess what I'm asking you is do you think that a lot of those things are just thrown out there as weapons, and that kind of stuff is encouraged by the attorneys just for the simple fact of winning the case? Or because the reason I'm bringing it up basically is that a lot of men feel that they are unjustly accused of a lot of stuff that other men do. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've tried to do on the program is get some sense of how many, of how many men are really just absolutely unreasonably psychologically out of control, mm-hmm. abusing, doing those things, and how much of that has to do with the real number of fathers who are out there legitimately concerned about their children and legitimately involved in trying to have some kind of say in their kids' lives. Do you have any opinion
Sure.
on that? If I
Yeah.
if I remain clear, sorry.
Well, once again, we could talk 30 minutes on that easily, I'm sure. Let's see if I can zero in right quick. Psychologists tell me that there are an appalling number of incidents of child molestation, sexual molestation. So relying on what they're telling me, I guess there is. I don't see it. I don't know about it. Even as a private investigator, I don't see it. I don't know about it. I hear many allegations.
That's hellaciously painful to have somebody accuse you of that, though.
Well, it is. It scares you to death. I've been investigated by Human Services on several occasions to the extent that Human Services will not, I guess they will take a report on me, but they say they'd rather not take a report on me because they've already been out there and talked to me, and they have indicated that those things weren't occurring in my home. Mm-hmm. What I do see, I see a large number. I see many fathers who are being accused, falsely accused. I believe in my experience, I see the female litigants using these unsubstantiated allegations to further their case. If you put a man in a position where he has to defend himself and he can't get to the real issues, which is, I'm losing the relationship with my child, if he can't get to that point because he's having to defend himself against allegations, misrepresentations, distortions of the truth, then all it does is further the other parent's position because the other parent is in the driver's seat.
We had a fellow on a recent program from Dads Against Discrimination that was suing his wife for slander.
Well, okay.
I mean, I'm just saying, you know, because of that reason, you know.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
Happens a lot.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, it's okay. What I do see is okay. First of all, you also hear about the default rate of fathers in child support. Mostly, it is men who pay child support. That condition comes from a historical precedent that men are providers and that women, they do gestate, bear, and suckle children, therefore they do have some sort of prior right. And historically, men have been the providers. However, I would have not had this child if we had made an agreement that in light of some civil disagreement that I would lose parental rights to my son. I wouldn't have joined in procreation with his mother. The intent there was to share the child's life. So I honor motherhood and was close to my mother. Nevertheless, my son is not the exclusive property of his mother, nor are any other children the exclusive property of either parent. It just so happens that our legal situation is that a parent with resources, finance and knowledge, can overwhelm another parent. And I want to get back to child support. I'm starting to ramble here a little bit. There's so much to talk about, or so much to say about what you've asked. There are statutes against not paying child support. Therefore, there are statistics. Therefore, you can refer to these statistics. There is no statutes against emotional manipulation, against subversion, against alienation of affection, against failure to foster good relations. Women know this, and they use it to the maximum. And because of the state of development of men in knowing who they are internally, men go for, they allow women to identify them, to say what they are, who they are. They allow women to describe their roles. And it may all come from the fact that men defer to women because they want to support the mother in her role. But what has occurred, what the extremes of that is that women know that they can make false allegations and put themselves in the driver's seat. And I know for a fact that I see it routinely used against men. And it's used very effectively, and it knocks most men out of the race. And what that does is separate the father from his children. What that does is set the children up for a lifetime of problems, predictable residual effects of abandonment. I'm not sure that I answered all the question.
Well, that's Gary. That certainly is insightful. I hadn't thought of a lot of it just that way. Let's say that where would a dad start if he wanted to wage battle?
Well, you would think that you would want to go to an attorney.
Right.
and pay him a great deal of money or her a great deal of money to pursue your case.
Right.
And that's probably what you'd want to do if you had the money. However, if you are a person who's making money, you're probably not a person who's providing primary care. If you're a person who's providing primary care to a child, you're probably not a person out there making lots of money. The most important element of custody is who was the primary care during the primary caregiver during the relationship. If you weren't a primary caregiver, then they're not going to give you as much consideration for being the primary custodian after the divorce. I really can only talk about my experience, and as it would transfer over to fathers, who I believe there is a large number of people just like me who did provide a certain amount of primary care, wanted to continue to provide a certain amount of primary care. However, they do not have the financial resources to have an attorney present their case for them. Therefore, they give up. The legal industry is so overwhelming that they don't know where to start or what to do. So, getting to your question, because I had lost a child in a previous marriage, I realized that bonding was perishable and that, in my case, it couldn't be rekindled. Without the common experience, you have no bond. Without the bond, you have no reason to be together. Therefore, what I used as a reference point in all of my decisions was, how is this going to affect the bond with my son? If I attempt to make lots of money to pay a high-priced attorney, then I'm not going to be able to spend the time with the child, being a primary caregiver. If I'm just a primary caregiver, how am I going to make enough money to feed us? But always going back to the point of, or to the question of, how is this going to affect my bond? That was the only thing that kept me sane, because of all, you can talk to 5 psychologists, you get 5 different answers. You talk to 5 lawyers, you get 5 different answers. Somewhere along the line, you've got to have something that keeps you going. So, not wanting anything to disrupt that bond, I searched in every way, every place that I could find in order to get help. I found that once you've declared bankruptcy, you don't have credit. Once your life financially is failing, you finally get to a point where there's nobody else that you can depend on but yourself. And that's when you start to make some headway. That's when you start to learn what to do. And then you can begin to learn how to practice domestic relations law. I haven't. I'm the world's biggest fool. I'm a pro se litigant. The courts hate to see me walk through the door. The lawyers all wish that we weren't around. But you can do it. You can't become a lawyer the day your wife files for divorce. But if you value the relationship with your children, you're going to spend 100-hour weeks figuring it out. And specifically asked the question, what do you do to make it happen? Was that what you were asking?
Yeah. I guess so.
Okay. I don't know if you can do it if you're not a legal person. Having 20 years in the legal business, you would think it would give me a great advantage. However, it doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. It doesn't teach you how to present yourself in court. It doesn't give you the rules of evidence, the rules of civil procedure. It doesn't teach you all the things you need to know about child psychology or dealing with experts. It doesn't teach you what only lawyers know who have been before the judge, been up against other attorneys, and who have had many clients. So it puts you at a very strong disadvantage. I found that dealing with psychologists was probably more important than, maybe more important than dealing with judges and attorneys. Judges, if a litigant thinks that judges are going to investigate and protect their rights, they are operating under a misconception. Judges hear evidence, they use their discretionary powers to try to make decisions that are in the best interest of the child. If you're thinking you can use a lawyer to protect yourself and protect your children, you're wrong. You're going to wind up spending lots of money and probably not getting any more than you would get anyway. And if you think that you can go into a psychologist and spill your guts out, you're wrong. Because if you've got a malicious spouse, a person who wants to subvert the father-child relationship, and they're using the rhetorical, subversive activities such as accusing men of sexual molestation, physical abuse, and all the other things, the psychologist, everyone is going to err on the side of safety. And if you're a large, aggressive male, in my case, you're going to fit the stereotype, and they're going to err on the side of safety, and it's going to take you a long, long time to convince them otherwise. So what I've done is two important things here that you need to do. First of all, you need to be the primary caregiver, as I've indicated, or else you're out of the race immediately. Second of all, you've got to have time to do this. If you're working for somebody else, you can't do this. This is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're dealing with extreme amounts of fear, anxiety, suppressed immunology, insomnia, as well as trying to figure out how to parent this little child in an atmosphere of relaxed nurturing. So basically what I did was I've probably read several thousand pages of child psychology and a lot of law, trying to understand what's going on.
Somebody wanted to call you and talk to you about it, Gary. What number could they call you at?
897-3917.
Do you think that it's possible that the courts at some point are going to be able to create, or do you think that all of this struggle that's going on here in the 80s and the 90s on the parts of dads becoming active is going to ultimately create some sort of a sane legislation that will remove some of this nutso stuff from, you know, because it's the child that's damaged, you know, and, you know, to accuse somebody of molestation, battering, abandonment, all of that kinds of stuff, it really seems counterproductive in the long. The only people that win are the attorneys.
That's exactly right.
And is it possible, do you see in the near future that there would be some sort of legislation that would help that?
No, what I think you're doing with your men's group and this show is making men aware of who they are and what their strengths are, and that they can be nurturers as well.
Listen, I'd like to thank you for being on the program today. This program is Speaking of Men. It's by and about men and women struggling for dialogue. It's Mike Rivas and Gary Lucas telling you to stand if you can, run if you have to, but whatever happens, guys, don't quit. Bye-bye.